Ladies and gentlemen, one of the hardest things we face in life is dealing with people who always have to be right, who twist the truth, who drain your energy. And yes, sometimes that's a narcissist, but here's the thing. God never told us to call them out, drag them into the light, or prove them wrong. What He told us was to trust Him and handle things His way. First, choose silence over arguments. You don't need to get caught in endless debates where they'll never admit fault. Your silence isn't weakness. It's strength under control. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is not saying a word. Second, set boundaries. Boundaries are not walls of hate. They're fences of peace. You're not cutting them off with anger. You're guarding the heart God gave you, and that's biblical. Third, respond with grace. Not sarcasm, not revenge, not getting even. Grace doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior. It means you refuse to let their behavior turn you bitter. Fourth, let your actions speak louder than your words. You don't have to prove who they are. Your consistency, honesty, and faith will make the truth obvious. Light doesn't argue with darkness. It just shines. Fifth, pray for wisdom. You don't know what God is doing behind the scenes. He can give you discernment to know when to step back, when to speak, and when to just let Him handle it. And finally, release them to God's justice. You don't have to fight every battle. God sees what you don't, and He will deal with every wrong. Your job isn't to punish, it's to protect your peace and let God handle the rest. The next time you're face to face with someone like this, remember, you don't have to call them out. You don't have to prove anything. You don't even have to fight back. You just have to stand in God's way of handling it. Quiet, strong, and faithful. Silence is not weakness, and it is certainly not surrender. When you choose silence over arguments, you are not giving someone else the victory. You are showing that you are already in control of yourself. The truth is, people who thrive on control and manipulation often want nothing more than to bait you into defending yourself, into proving something, into going back and forth until they wear you down. But silence interrupts that cycle. It takes away the stage they are standing on. You don't need to expose them. Their words and actions will eventually do that on their own. What silence does is shift the power back into your hands because it says, I don't need to participate in this to know my worth. Think about how much energy arguments drain from you. Every word you say, they twist. Every point you make, they flip upside down. And after all of it, you walk away feeling tired, frustrated, and unheard. But when you refuse to argue, you walk away with your peace intact. You show them and yourself that you don't have to be understood to stand firm. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one carrying the greatest strength. That is the kind of silence that speaks louder than any comeback you could ever give. Silence also gives space for God to work. When you stop trying to fight every battle with your words, you leave room for God's justice to show itself in His timing. There is a verse that says, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Being still doesn't mean being passive. It means trusting that you don't have to match the noise of someone else to stand strong. Silence, backed with faith, is one of the most powerful responses you can give, because it shows you know who holds the real authority. There's also wisdom in silence. Every time you choose not to argue, you give yourself the gift of clarity. You're no longer tangled in someone else's web of confusion or lies. Instead, you stand outside of it, seeing clearly what is going on. Silence becomes your shield. It protects your heart, your mind, and your peace. And over time, people start to notice. They see that you don't waste your breath, that you don't let every little jab pull you into a fight. And that says more about your strength than any words could. Of course, silence doesn't mean you tolerate mistreatment or pretend things are okay. Silence is not agreement. It's not approval. It's choosing not to let your energy be stolen by a battle that cannot be won with words. It's choosing dignity over drama. And when you consistently walk in that strength, it leaves no doubt where your confidence comes from. At the end of the day, silence is not about shutting someone else out. It's about keeping yourself grounded. It's about reminding yourself that your value isn't up for debate, that peace is worth more than proving a point, and that God's truth doesn't need your shouting to be seen. Your quiet strength speaks volumes, and in that stillness, you become unshakable. Setting godly boundaries is one of the healthiest and holiest things you can do for yourself and for others. A boundary isn't about building a wall of anger or cutting people off with bitterness. It's about creating space where peace, respect, and love can exist. When God tells us to guard our hearts, He is reminding us that not everyone should have unlimited access to our lives. Some people drain your energy, twist your words, and constantly overstep lines. Without boundaries, you end up living on their terms instead of God's. Boundaries protect the gift of peace that God has given you, and they allow you to honor Him in the way you handle relationships. Boundaries are not revenge. They are not punishment. They are clarity. They make it known what you will and will not accept. Not to control someone else, but to keep yourself aligned with the life God has called you to live. A boundary might look like choosing not to answer every phone call, not engaging in endless arguments, or deciding that certain topics are off limits with a particular person. It can mean limiting the time you spend with someone who constantly drains your spirit. These aren't acts of cruelty. They are acts of wisdom. They say, I love myself enough to not let this continue, and I love you enough to not pretend this behavior is okay. The power of godly boundaries is that they come from a place of grace, not spite. You don't set them to get even or to make someone pay. You set them because you recognize that you are a child of God, worthy of peace and dignity, and you are called to steward your heart wisely. A boundary is you saying, this is where I end and you begin, and I will not let your chaos become my chaos. And when you live by that standard, you not only protect yourself, but you also model what healthy relationships should look like. Boundaries are also a way of trusting God with justice. You don't have to seek revenge, expose someone's flaws, or get the last word. Instead, you step back and let God handle what only He can. That doesn't mean you stay silent about truth or tolerate abuse. It means you refuse to fight dirty. It means you don't let bitterness drive your decision. By setting limits, you free yourself from cycles of toxicity, and you remind yourself that your role isn't to fix or control others. Your role is to live in alignment with God's peace. Sometimes people won't like your boundaries. They'll accuse you of being distant, cold, or unforgiving. But that's because boundaries remove their ability to manipulate or control. Don't let their resistance convince you to abandon what God told you to guard. Peace is worth more than approval. Dignity is worth more than pleasing everyone. And walking in God's way is worth more than staying trapped in someone else's dysfunction. At the end of the day, setting godly boundaries is an act of strength and faith. It's choosing to protect your heart without hardening it, to walk in peace without revenge, and to honor God by refusing to live in chaos. Boundaries don't push people away, they keep you safe enough to love them from the right distance. And when you hold to them with grace and conviction, you'll find that the peace you protect is the peace that carries you forward. Responding with grace instead of retaliation is one of the most powerful ways to rise above the negativity of others. When someone mistreats you, disrespects you, or tries to pull you into their chaos, the natural reaction is to strike back. Retaliation feels justified in the moment, because you want them to feel the sting of what they did to you. But when you step into that cycle, you don't just reflect their behavior, you join it. Their anger becomes your anger. Their disrespect becomes your response. And suddenly you are no longer in control. Grace, on the other hand, breaks the cycle. It shows that you are not defined by someone else's actions, but by your own choices. Grace is not weakness. It doesn't mean letting someone walk all over you, or pretending their behavior is acceptable. Grace means you refuse to let their behavior dictate who you are. It is strength under control. It is choosing to stay calm when they expect you to lash out. It is keeping your composure when they want you to lose it. Grace says, I see what you're doing, but I will lower myself to match it. That kind of response doesn't excuse their behavior, but it keeps you from being poisoned by it. When you respond with grace, you remind yourself that their behavior is their reflection, not yours. If they choose lies, manipulation, arrogance, or cruelty, that reveals their heart, not yours. You don't have to carry their baggage or mirror their actions. You are accountable for your own character, and grace keeps you aligned with it. While retaliation might give you a momentary sense of satisfaction, grace gives you long-term peace. Retaliation escalates, grace de-escalates. Retaliation leaves regret. Grace leaves dignity. Grace also invites God into the situation. In Scripture, we are told not to repay evil with evil, but to overcome evil with good. That doesn't mean you let yourself be abused. It means you trust God with justice and refuse to let bitterness take root. Grace is a reminder that you don't have to fight every battle, because some battles are won by stepping aside and letting God handle them. It is a declaration that you belong to something greater than petty arguments and toxic cycles. Of course, showing grace isn't always easy. It takes humility, patience, and a clear sense of identity. People may mistake your grace for weakness, but that's because they don't understand the strength it takes to rise above retaliation. Grace requires discipline, it requires self-control, and it requires a heart that is more focused on peace than on proving a point. But the beauty of grace is that it protects your peace, even in the middle of conflict. At the end of the day, responding with grace is not about them. It's about you. It's about guarding your heart, preserving your dignity, and living in alignment with God's wisdom. Their behavior will always reflect who they are. Your response will always reflect who you are. And when you choose grace over retaliation, you show the world and yourself that your identity is rooted in strength, peace, and faith, not in the chaos of others. Grace will always outshine retaliation, and in the end it leaves you standing taller, freer, and stronger. Actions have a language of their own, and they often speak louder than any words we could ever say. When you let your actions show your values, you no longer feel the need to constantly defend yourself, argue your point, or prove your worth to anyone. People may question your motives, twist your words, or spread lies about you, but your consistent actions will always tell the truth. Living with integrity is not about putting on a performance for others. It's about choosing every day to align your behavior with the values you believe in, whether people are watching or not. Integrity is steady, it doesn't rise and fall with emotions, and it doesn't bend just because someone else refuses to live by it. The power of actions is that they expose lies without you having to. When someone tries to paint you in a false light, you don't have to chase down every rumor or correct every misconception. Over time, people begin to notice the difference between who they say you are and who you consistently show yourself to be. Words can be twisted, but actions carry a weight that can't be faked for long. A person living with integrity doesn't have to announce. It's evident in the way they treat people, the way they follow through on promises, in the way they hold themselves accountable even when it's hard. Living with integrity also protects your peace. When your actions line up with your values, you don't live with the anxiety of trying to manage how others see you. You're not scrambling to control opinions or fight every false story because you know the truth will reveal itself through the life you live. Integrity sets you free from the exhausting cycle of proving and defending. Instead, you live with quiet confidence, knowing that time always unmasks what words cannot. But integrity isn't always easy. It's tested most when lies are loud, when mistreatment is real, and when people expect you to react in anger. Integrity doesn't mean you never feel hurt or tempted to fight back. It means you choose to stay rooted in your values even when it costs you something. And yes, it does. It costs your pride, your desire for instant vindication, and sometimes even your relationships with those who can't handle your consistency. But what you gain is far greater: peace of mind, credibility that no one can buy, and the assurance that you live truthfully before God and others. When you let your actions do the talking, you shift the focus away from noise and toward truth. You become a living contradiction to every false story told about you, not because you argued against it, but because your life proved it wrong. That is the power of integrity. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need approval. It simply stands. And in the end, your consistent actions will be remembered far longer than the lies spoken about you. Integrity doesn't just expose dishonesty, it outlasts. And when you choose to live that way, your life itself becomes the loudest testimony of truth and strength. Praying for wisdom and patience is one of the most powerful things you can do when you're dealing with difficult people. It's easy to ask God to change the other person, to fix them, or to make them treat you better. But sometimes the real strength comes from asking Him to change you first. Wisdom allows you to see beyond the surface, to recognize patterns of behavior, and to discern what's really going on beneath the noise. Patience gives you the ability to respond instead of react, to wait instead of rush, and to stand firm without being dragged into unnecessary conflict. Together, wisdom and patience form a shield that protects your peace while guiding your choices. When you pray for wisdom, you're asking God to open your eyes in ways your emotions can't. Emotions can cloud judgment. Anger pushes you toward retaliation. Hurt drives you toward defensiveness. And frustration tempts you to give up altogether. But wisdom cuts through the fog. It shows you when to speak and when to stay silent, when to lean in and when to step back, when to confront with love and when to let God handle it. And wisdom doesn't mean you always know the full picture, but it means you're walking with the one who does. Patience is equally important, because dealing with difficult people can feel like an endless. They repeat the same patterns, test your limits, and sometimes make you feel like you're not making any progress at all. Patience reminds you that change takes time, sometimes more time than you'd like, and that your role isn't to force the outcome, but to stay steady in the process. Patience also allows you to endure without becoming hardened. It keeps your heart soft enough to love while protecting it from being consumed by bitterness. The truth is, wisdom and patience are gifts from God, but they also grow stronger with practice. The more you choose patience over anger, the more natural it becomes. The more you seek wisdom in prayer, the clearer your discernment grows. You will begin to notice that situations which once sent you spiraling no longer have the same power over you. That's the work of God shaping your character, giving you the tools to handle people who may never change while still keeping your spirit whole. Praying for wisdom and patience also shows humility. It's an acknowledgement that you don't have all the answers, and that you need God's guidance to navigate complicated relationships. That humility opens the door for God to work through you instead of you trying to handle everything on your own. And when you lean on Him, you start to see that wisdom isn't just about knowing what to do, but also about knowing when to wait, when to trust, and when to let go. At the end of the day, asking God for wisdom and patience doesn't make difficult people disappear, but it changes the way you carry yourself around them. It keeps you from being reactive. It helps you maintain peace, and it gives you discernment to move wisely. Difficult people may not change, but you will, and that change is what allows you to walk in strength, grace, and clarity, no matter how chaotic the situation may be. In the end, wisdom and patience are not just prayers you whisper, they become the way you live. Releasing someone to God's justice is one of the hardest but most freeing choices you will ever make. When people hurt you, lie about you, or mistreat you, the natural instinct is to defend yourself, to expose them, or to get even. You want them to feel what you felt, to pay for what they did, to know that their actions weren't without consequences. But carrying that weight only ties you to the very pain you're trying to escape. God never asks you to fight every battle. He asks you to trust Him with justice. And when you release people into His hands, you set yourself free from the burden of revenge, in the exhaustion of trying to control outcomes that only He can handle. There's a deep peace that comes from knowing you don't have to play judge, jury, and execution. That's God's role, and He does it with perfect fairness. Our vision is limited. We see what's on the surface. We react to the moment. We judge by what hurt us. But God sees everything, every motive, every hidden action, every ripple effect we could never understand. When you release someone to His justice, you're acknowledging that His ways are higher than yours, and His timing is better than anything you could force. Letting go doesn't mean what they did was okay. It doesn't mean you excuse it, forget it, or allow it to keep happening. Releasing them to God's justice is not about pretending it never mattered. It's about trusting that it mattered so much that only God Himself can handle it properly. You still set boundaries. You still protect your peace. You still make wise choices to guard your life. But the burden of punishment, the need to make them pay, is no longer yours to carry. That weight belongs to God. Sometimes you won't see immediate results. They might seem to get away with things for a while. They might even look like they're thriving. But remember, God is never mocked. What a person sows, they will eventually reap. You may not witness the process, but you can trust the promise. And in the meantime, releasing them allows you to move forward, instead of staying stuck in bitterness. You get your energy back, your joy back, and your focus. Instead of replaying the offense, you can redirect that energy into living the life God has for you. Releasing someone to God's justice is also an act of humility. It admits that you don't have the power to fix everything, but you serve a God who it shifts the responsibility from your hands to His, and that's where it belongs. When you carry a grudge, you carry a weight God never asked you to hold. But when you release it, you make space for healing, for growth, and for. At the end of the day, you don't have to fight battles that God has already claimed. Your job is not to get even. It's to stay faithful, to stay at peace, and to keep walking forward. Justice will come, but it won't come through bitterness or it will come through God's perfect timing in His perfect ways. And when you trust Him with that, you discover a freedom no retaliation could ever give. Releasing them is not losing, it's winning by choosing peace over poison, trust over control, and faith over fear. So when you put it all together, God's way of handling difficult and narcissistic people is not about exposing them, arguing with them, or trying to win battles with words. It's about learning to choose silence over argument, setting godly boundaries, responding with grace instead of retaliation, letting your actions reflect your values, praying for wisdom and patience, and ultimately releasing them to God's justice. Each of these steps is less about changing them and more about protecting your peace, honoring your integrity, and trusting that God sees what you cannot. You don't need to fight every fight. You don't need to prove every point, and you don't need to carry the weight of justice on your shoulder. When you follow God's way, you walk in strength, dignity, and freedom, knowing that He will handle what you cannot. Thank you.